Wait, before you screw, I want you to listen to this, and I promise you, you're going to learn a lot. You see, during the transatlantic slave trade, the European Christian missionaries were the middlemen between the European slave masters and our African ancestors. The European slave masters, they saw religion as the biggest tool to subdue Africans to everlasting mental slavery. Therefore, the Christian missionaries were used by the European slave masters to carefully teach few Africans how to speak English and French, depending on the European colonial country. The missionaries carefully taught Africans their European lingua franca in order to use them as tools or agents to oppress their fellow Africans. This was the first way they divided our African brothers and sisters among themselves. These few Africans became tools in the hands of the slave masters. They were given European uniforms as European police staffs of the colonial masters. They were educated with the Bible to hate their culture. They were indoctrinated to demonize their African ancestors, detest their language and culture. In fact, they took the whip from the slave masters and they whipped their fellow Africans for disobeying the command of the European slave masters. The European slave masters converted few of our brothers and sisters to Christianity and used them as agents to eliminate and destroy our traditional shrines and holy places of worship. These Africans became the first victims of European slavery and brutality. They took the slave masters to the places we worshipped our chi and they set it ablaze after declaring it diabolic and satanic. One of these Africans who was used to betray his ancestors and worked with the European slave masters was Ajayi Crowther, a young man sold into slavery when he was just 12 years old. Later was taken to Sierra Leone, where he was baptized and indoctrinated into disliking everything his ancestors taught him. From 1842 to 1851, he carefully worked with the European slave masters to indoctrinate his people in Yoruba land into Christianity. He took the slave masters to sacred places in Yoruba land and they destroyed it because he wants to be the first bishop in Africa. And he was made the first bishop of Africa after betraying his people. He is one of the reasons Christianity took a strong hold on our African people today. The slave masters knew that Christianity is the easiest tool to break the lion in Africans, and they used this tool very well. King Leopold II of Belgium knew this since 1885 after the Berlin Conference. King Leopold II knew that Christianity can be used to cripple and emasculate our African ancestors. That was why he wrote a letter to the Christian missionaries in Congo, commanding them to teach our African ancestors to cherish and love poverty. The Christian missionaries sent by King Leopold II of Belgium taught Africans that only a poor man can make heaven, and our African ancestors believed with alacrity. This was the tactics King Leopold II of Belgium used to keep our African brothers and sisters in permanent mental slavery. The same Christian European missionaries who claimed that they stopped the killing of twins in Calabar, Nigeria, were the ones who forcefully raped our African young girls in the slave boats, gave out African babies as food to their European alligators and crocodile, and they drowned over 15 million of our African ancestors to death from 1562 to 1884 to save their slave boat from sinking. They said our culture is demonic, satanic, and diabolical, but they did demonic things to our African ancestors. They snatched our African little babies from our African mothers and used the melanin of the babies to make bleaching cream. They caged our ancestors like dogs and mercilessly raped our young men in front of their wives as punishment for disobedience. The same people who accused our ancestors of satanic practices buried our weak parents alive because they were sick and unable to work as slaves. The Arabs are not saints. In fact, the Arabs have already started enslaving our innocent African ancestors in North Africa for over 700 years, since the 7th century AD, before the European transatlantic slave trade, which officially started in the mid-15th century. The Arabs The Arabs accused our innocent African ancestors of paganism, but the atrocities they unleashed on our ancestors was worse than paganism. When they came to Egypt on December 639 AD, invaded in 640 AD, and conquered Egypt and the entire North Africa in 641 AD, they compelled our African ancestors to accept Islam. Those who refused to accept Islam, some were killed and some were used as slaves, and they were brutally molested and abused. This was the beginning of the Arab slave trade in Africa, and little discussion is given to it. Enslaved Africans were exported by Muslim Arabs to places such as Asia, India, Indonesia, and even China, where they worked as servants, concubines, and soldiers. This shows how far the Arab slave trade went. For instance, Africans were sold to Chinese rulers and their dynasties, who brutally raped and molested innocent African women and little children. African slaves who are weak and tired due to travels from their long journeys, who could not walk, were stabbed to death by their Arab slave masters out of anger. You see, the anger arose because they feel they have lost so much profit that they would have gotten if the African slave was able to walk. This is because every slave buyer needs a healthy slave. African slave women who are weak and sick were hung on a tree to death. Some were slaughtered from their throats, and those African slave men who could not walk were starved to death by their Arab slave masters. It is estimated that more than 80,000 African slaves died each year before getting to the slave markets like the Zanzibar market. Between 1500 to the 1900, 17 million Africans were sold into slavery by Arab Muslims on the coast of the Indian Ocean and the Middle East, where Arab Muslims resides. This is the people who introduced and converted you to Islam. This is the people you are killing your brothers and sisters for because your brother and sisters insulted Prophet Muhammad. This is the people who brought Christianity and converted you to Christianity. This is the people who gave you the Quran and introduced Allah and Muhammad to you. You are defending the religion of your slave masters because you don't know anything about how these religions came to Africa. Wake up, black man, and renounce that religion. Give it back to the slave masters. We are in the age of illumination, awakening, and enlightenment. Therefore, I implore you to buy the book which I wrote and authored, The Untold History of the Black Race and the Fall of African Civilization, which is in Volume 1 and Volume 2 with updated knowledge. The book is only in PDF. Therefore, send a message to my DM now to buy yours. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Ebenezer Heru and follow me on Instagram at Ebenezer Heru if you want to know more. One love, lovers of history.